All right. So our keynote speaker is Remi, and his talk will be titled Open Science Best Practices, Past Accomplishments and Future Challenges. So his too long didn't read is I wanted to understand how the brain works. Now I tell people how to name files, folders, and variables, which you already sort of heard in the opening keynote, as well as you will learn that's a little bit open science is about. And he's a research associate in the Origami Lab at the McGill University. And he has a background both in biology and psychology. And he's passionate about open science in many ways. And I'm sure he's going to talk all about that. But like one of the many things that he's contributing and maintaining is NILearn. I'm sure any neuroimaging folks know what NILearn is, and bid standards. We actually have a project on bids in this BrainHack, and Kobidas and Artemis are also other open science things that he's involved in. So with that, I thank you for joining us from all the way to Belgium, and like take it away.
Sure. Okay. I will jump right in. So I think that this, in any case, if I last too long for this talk and I go over time, please, someone just interrupt me and tell me to maybe go a bit faster. It's kind of a bit of a new talk for me. I've reused some of my old things, but so I have no idea in terms of timing where I'm going to land. Anyway, so usually when I talk about open science, I try to define it a little bit, or at least to sort of set the stage, because you may hear the term a lot. You keep using that word, but I don't think it means what you think it means. Or you may think it means something, and I think it means something else. And then after half an hour, realize that we are talking past each other, right? So it's become really an umbrella term that covers a lot of different things. And the way I like to see it is open science is like a big communal tent in which you can enter from many different places, right? So some people come to open science for different reasons. So from people will come to open science for the aspects around publishing, open access. Some other people will come to open science because they care about equity, diversity, and inclusion. Some others because they care about open data or open source, meaning you want to share your code. And then some people will be more because they want to make sure that people and citizens are getting involved into the research and that they're going to benefit from. Or teachers want to make sure that the materials are openly accessible to all. And finally, I think that something has become a lot more important in the past 10 years is all the aspects around reproducibility. There is no way I'm going to be able to cover all of those points in the little time that I have, so I'm going to try to restrict myself to like the three first points. And my slides are, the three first points. So mostly about the aspects around publishing, about open data, and about equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'm going to try to sort of do a bit of a, let's go back in time for each of those points. So at least for the two first ones I'm going to talk about, and sort of compare to where we are now and see where we could go in the future. So for example, when it came to publishing 25 years ago, the article, when we talk about a scientific article, we talked about something that was a physical entity. It was literally a few pieces of paper that had things written on them. And if you wanted to have access to them, you would have to go to the library, get the edition of a specific journal, and then sort of hopefully find the things you were looking for in that journal. 25 years ago, I think I was more or less starting university, and one of the TA for one of my class told me that I should start using this new thing that really helped for literature search, and it was called PubMed. So that thing had just come around a few years before, and that was sort of the brand new thing. You had also some journals that were starting, like PLOS, that were pretty much just only online, and you could easily access all their articles published as a PDF and click it and just download and have the article right away on your computer, which compared to all the other things seems like a massive sort of improvement. And well, there weren't really a lot of preprints for the stuff we did, but the physicists that started this thing called Archive in the 90s, I think, 1990s, where you could post your research before you even got published officially into a journal, right? So all these things sort of existed back at the time. Today, what does it look like? Well, first of all, most articles that you're going to read them as a PDF. So that's become like sort of the standard where all the articles exist as a single file that you can easily access. And PubMed has changed a lot. Now there's literally, you can literally scrape entire like swath of the literature and do your research very easily. Some of the people in the lab that I've joined at McGill have actually created tools that I got to use recently, where if you want to do a literature search, they've got easy, a couple of tools like PubGet that will allow you to sort of do an easy query of all the articles that match a certain topic, and then they will get you all the content of all those articles, and then you can use another tool to do some sort of systematic review of that literature by labeling those different articles. So some of those things were just completely unthinkable 25 years ago, and things have really sort of dramatically changed thanks to some sort of open science aspects on this front. Talk about open science and open access. I would tend to say that open access, meaning that anyone can access articles from a specific journal, has become a lot more common, if not the norm, meaning that anyone can go, you can go to any journal and you can go to browse all their archives back to, whenever that journal started, and you can access those articles as a PDF. That's not a problem. And even for a lot of them, you can have free access to those articles. You don't even need to pay anything. Something that has changed as well is that the type of articles you can submit has kind of changed. We've seen in the past, I guess, 10 years-ish, the rise of what are called pre-registration, and especially register reports, where you don't submit the final version of your article, but you submit the study you're planning to do to the journal, and they can sort of, and you get reviews before you run the study, and the article will get published no matter what the results are, whether they're positive or negative. So this is kind of a change in what kind of things you can do, and this has clearly resulted from a lot of the open science movements. And I think register reports now are offered in all over 300 journals. So it is really sort of gaining a lot of momentum in the past few years. And now you have a large number of preprints that you can use if you want to publish your or put your or make your articles available like early before they actually published in a journal. I mean, you can choose some archive is still available, but you also have bioRxiv, Star Archive, or Neurolibre. I'm not sure whether Pierre told you about that, but I think that if he hasn't, I think you can go and ask him a few questions. I'm sure he'd be happy to answer. And so now you have all these different options to publish your, to make your articles available earlier than so that people, you don't have to wait that they go through the whole peer review so that others can sort of start reading what you've been working on. Another thing that also exists is that there's a whole system of what's called post-publication review, where there is one of the, I think the main website for this is PubPeer, where if you read an article and you would like to make comments on it or see what others have said about it, you have an entire forum where people can discuss articles and with their pros and cons. And there's a and so you can realize that an article was published 10 years and that made a big splash at the time. Now you realize that has a lot more problems. So there we found that there were issues with it, and you can sort of discuss those issues over there. So that's more or less where we are nowadays. In terms of challenges or sort of trends for the future, Well, there's still the fact that most of a large part of the publishing industry is, a for-profit business. One image you may see once in a while on social media is this article that talks about the growing accessibility of science, published in some journals owned by Nature, and you literally have to pay $200 to actually get access to it. So it's a bit ironic. And in case you're not familiar with the absurdity of the publishing industry, so the most common scenario is literally where you take public money and you go and dump it into private pockets of some private corporations. So researchers who are usually paid by public money have to pay private corporations so they can publish their articles. In most cases, you give up on the copyright to your articles, and in the worst cases, the corporation then owns your actual article and decide what can be done with it. Corporations get paid, but all the sort of downstream work in terms of handling the article and reviewing it, they don't have to pay for, because most of the time editors are volunteers and reviewers are also volunteers. And in the final product of all of this, usually or very often ends up being a paywall, and researchers or even other stakeholders, or even the public in general, may have to pay to read those articles. And they may have to pay even though everything else, all those private corporations was paid very often by public money. That, we may think this is completely normal, but go and try to tell that to anyone who is not in science or in research or in academia, and you get a lot of like head scratching, and they'll start wondering if we are all sane, just staying in a business that functions like this. So this is definitely something that I wish could change in the near future. The push for open access, meaning that people don't have to pay to read the articles, has sort of triggered those companies to raise what's called the author processing charge, meaning that, well, people don't have to pay to read, but now we're going to ask you to pay more to publish those articles as open access. So that has created some issues and tensions in the field. I think one of the main one that you may have heard about this year is that all the editors of New Image decided to quit and go and create their own journals with a lower publication fee, because they realized it was completely unacceptable to ask researchers to pay that much to publish in New Image. So meaning that you may think that you have no way to influence the system, but if you are a certain level, you can definitely change things by deciding to not just play along with that system. Another thing that is coming along, I think there at the policy level, for example, in Europe, there's going to be a big push toward what's called diamond open access, meaning that you don't have to pay to publish and you don't have to pay to read the article. So it's going to be interesting to see how those things are going to evolve in the future in Europe and in other places. I'm kind of curious to see how that one's going to influence the business, to be honest. One way this could go is by developing what are called overlay journals. One example that in our field is neurons behavior data analysis and theory, which literally is a journal that's where you to publish into this journal, you just have to post a preprint on archive, and then for free you can then sort of submit your articles to this journal, and they use some sort of LaTeX template to render everything. And I think the only cost that they have in their business model is that they have to pay a little bit of money for the minting of the DOI, for the sort of the digital object identifiers. But everything else, as the costs are almost close to zero, because now they have all the infrastructure you need to sort of run those kind of journals. One thing that I wish could change in the future is that we should stop seeing this article as this thing written in stone, and an article what's been published cannot evolve. And that if you have new data, or if you realize that you made a mistake in your code, publishing an erratum nowadays in an article is very complicated. And I think that we nowadays have the infrastructures and the tools to make articles a lot more flexible, and that if you need to update something in your article because you realize you made a mistake somewhere, it should be much easier than it is actually. I think there are some practices in terms of articles that could sort of align more in how we deal with software when there is a bug. We just make an amendment to the code and then really make a new release. And I think there's a lot to learn, I think, from how we deal with articles if we stop seeing them as a very static and completely immutable thing that can never be changed. Another thing that you may hear some people complaining about is the lack of how difficult it is for editors to find reviewers for their articles. But I think that if we don't start rewarding reviewers in some sense, there's not going to be a lot of incentive for people to start reviewing articles or to keep on reviewing articles. And I don't necessarily mean a monetary type of reward, though maybe being actually paid some type of money for reviewing papers, especially if it's, if you're a major corporation who makes just millions of dollars a year, maybe you can actually just pay your reviewers. But it could also be just that instead of, when you check someone's CV, instead of just checking the number of publications they have, if we had a system to sort of tally how many reviews they publish or they contribute to, that could also be an interesting way to sort of incentivize reviewing in general. Okay, so that was about sort of publishing. Now I'm going to talk a bit more about data sharing. And once again, I'm sort of going to go back in time a little bit and sort of try to remember how it was 25 years ago. Well, first of all, we didn't have sort of, at least for MRI, so some of the things I'm mentioning here are much more MRI focused. I'm not sure how it was for EEG, MEG at the time. But definitely for MRI, there was not yet a commonly accepted data format for research. So there were some that were emerging, but nothing that had got adopted by all the different softwares and so on. There clearly was no common way to organize your data. You could end up in a lab where some people had some ideas of how data should be organized, and maybe you'd get lucky, or no one told you how data was supposed to be organized, and then you would organize your data like you organize your holiday pictures, right? So that could end up in some pretty dramatic results, as you can imagine. And there clearly was no infrastructure to facilitate data sharing. This may seem like a minor detail, but there's a very good sort of framework. I'm not sure whether I can call it a framework, but Brian Nosek had a very interesting sort of image or metaphor explaining that if you don't, so this is how he talks about open science. So sorry, Brian Nosek, if you don't know him, is one of the guys behind the Center for Open Science. And he had sort of this blog post about how you can make cultural change when it comes to open science and how we can sort of make things move in a certain direction. And he's got this pyramid where it says that, if you want to make, open science a more common thing, we have to go through these levels. But infrastructure is really at the base of everything, because if you don't even have the infrastructure, it's not even possible to even get started, right? Then you have all these other steps where, if you got a better interface and it's easier, then it gets accepted by the communities, then everyone sees it as the norm, and so on and so forth. But data sharing 25 years ago would have been really, really hard, because there was, you would have to set up your own infrastructure. You would have to set up your own servers and things so that you could even share your own data. Where do we stand today? Well, at least for MRI, now we have a data format that has been accepted by everyone. and that what at least most softwares now use commonly. This may seem trivial, but for example, people who do near-infrared spectroscopy had to literally in the past few years, I think, had to come up with their own data format just so they can easily sort of agree on how, on how their data should be saved, so they could work together, right? When it comes to organizing your data, the brain imaging data structure has become pretty much the de facto sort of standard way of organizing your data. And if you've never heard about the brain imaging data structure, we are maintaining an awesome list with all the things that are BIDS related in general. So I really recommend you go and have a look at the repository that I took a picture of there. If you have questions about BIDS, you can obviously answer them at some point, no problem. And when it comes to where you can share your data, now you have like really many options. The main one you may have heard of is going to be OpenEuro for sharing anything that's like BIDS related. But you have some others like the Open Science Framework and just many other ways you can actually share your data. So that has become, now we clearly have the infrastructure to at least facilitate this. And this is, you can clearly see that there's been some adoption about this because this is the number of BIDS data set that have been put on OpenEuro in the past several years. And I think that I was sort of doing a count recently of how much data in terms of BIDS data set, at least just BIDS data set, there is out there. And we're getting close to, I don't know, 70 terabytes of raw, which is purely raw data out there that is completely open. Obviously, you may have things that are on private repositories or in some other places. And if you start also including things that are not BIDS data set, the amount of data that you have openly available out there is just much bigger than this. I'm talking about OpenEuro, but you have some other places or some other data set that are accessible out there, like and this is still just BIDS data set actually. So either the ABIDE studies, Neuromod that I think Pierre may have mentioned. Once again, if he has not, go and ask him. With a wide diversity in terms of how many participants you have, data sets. Some of them are just having a single participant that has been scanned a lot of time. Some others having many participants that have been scanned much less. So a wide diversity of openly available data out there. In terms of data sharing, so there are still sort of challenges and trends in the future, I would say. I think there's still some sort of finding the right balance in terms of we want to share our data, so there's a sort of push towards openness. But at the same time, we should be careful about the privacy of our participants, and striking the right balance will depend on the country and the legislation and the country and the legislation that sort of affects your research. That sort of aligns quite well with what the FAIR principle behind sort of findability, or actually more accessibility of your data. So in general, if you've read anything about FAIR, sort of this motto that you'll hear very often is that data should be as open as possible, but as closed as necessary, right? So people try to avoid now talking about completely open data, and they talk about FAIR data because it sort of tries to be more nuanced about those things. And something that clearly came out of the open science, at least movement in the neuroscience world, and involved many people from all the BrainHack community, has been this open brain consent, meaning that if you are starting a new study, or applying for a new grant or whatever, and you need to sort of come up with consent form that will maximize the chances or to sort of make you able to share your data, then there are templates of a consent form that exists that try to sort of help you in the direction that you can more easily reuse for to create your own consent forms. Another challenge I think that's going to come in the future is that now we have plenty of data that's out there, and it's relatively well structured, and we tend to use the same structure, but there's still a lot of things that make it harder to sort of use several data sets at the same time. It may be a silly detail, but when people write their a TSV file or like a table that describes the participants in their data, they're going to start naming their columns slightly differently, and they're going to be using maybe different units. But then if you, as a researcher, you want to pull all those data together into a giant data set or to run a very large study, you're going to have to sort of find a way to harmonize those different data sets. And this is definitely going to be something that's going to be adding a lot of friction to anyone who wants to sort of to reuse a lot of those open data out there. So there are tools that exist that are emerging. One of them is developed by some of my colleagues in Montreal, which helps actually not only just harmonize data across data sets, but also to facilitate making searches across those harmonized data. And the kind of thing that you can then easily do, so this is a graph based on a subsample of data from OpenNeuro, but this is like the most trivial example I could come up with, but it is, let me get just, I don't know, 260 data sets from OpenNeuro that have MRI, and let me just plot the age distribution for men and women in those different data sets. Without this kind of data harmonization, this would take you just, I don't know, weeks to sort of perform, to just get to this graph. Whereas right now, it's a matter of a few clicks and a bit of Python coding, and you're pretty much done. So this is going to be needed if we want to sort of reuse a lot of the data out there, but this is going to be a bit of an effort and a challenge for the future for sure. And another thing that I would like to mention is that there's been a huge emphasis when it comes to sharing data, or about sharing your raw data, and I think to an extent to the detriment of making sure that people share the end results of their study in a way that's more easily reusable. So this website NeuroVolt has been existing for a very, very long time. And it's where people can dump their statistical maps for an fMRI study, for example, where you say, this is the T map of the activations for my research, and here it is, right? The problem is that when you go and browse data there's very little information as to what each of those maps actually contain, and people just dump their data there, but with very little sort of metadata that makes it easy to reuse, right? And I think that there should be a lot more emphasis on just using those kind of resources that already exist, and making sure that people just add sufficient metadata to their to this kind of data. One point I would actually want to make about this is that you may be complaining that you cannot share your data because your consent form did not allow you to do this. The thing is that when you're publishing an article, whether you know it or not, you're already sharing your data. Why do I say that? Well, just because your results, even if it's just a table with the coordinates of the activations in the brain, are already those results are already data. It's a very summarized version of your data, but it is data that other people can use to actually run studies, and those are called meta-analysis, right? Then it would be just nice if you just could put out there a slightly less summarized version of your data. For example, the statistical maps that you would put on NeuroVolt. I think to me, it would be sort of a required thing for any paper that, talks about brain activation or something like this, that they make those statistical maps available. Obviously, it would be nice if we could all publish our raw data, or even raw and pre-processed data. That would be fantastic. But publishing all this data comes with a higher cost. So just publishing your statistical maps doesn't take you a lot of time, and it's not a lot of data in terms of how much space it takes. So it's definitely a lot easier. And there is this trade-off that definitely potential for reuse is less if you just publish your coordinates of your study, and it's a lot more if you have your pre-processed data. But also, it's much easier to publish those statistical maps and those peak coordinates because they're more anonymized. So I think that sort of maybe for people who cannot publish their raw data for whatever reason, trying to emphasize that they should publish better versions of their results would actually be a good way forward. And then I finally want to very quickly talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I just have a few slides on this. More sort of also that to say that we sometimes have to pick our battles when it comes to open science, and either as an individual or as a movement, we cannot do everything at once. It's good to sort of keep those different dimensions of open science in mind, but sometimes it's just hard to sort of be good on all those fronts at the same time. One of the thing that is kind of clear when you look at our community and the data that we produce is that it tends to be sort of a bit of a weird sort of thing. And by weird, I mean sort of Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And it might not be representative of, the rest of the population of the world. I'm going to give you a few examples. This is just the graph that I showed you earlier of the data that's actually openly available on OpenEuro. And you can see that, the vast majority of people who have been sort of studied are fairly young people. So that there's definitely a bias, once again, to just study, college students in very often. So that may be something that we may want to sort of rethink when we run our studies. This is a quick overview of where the different open BIDS data sets were acquired. You can see that most of them come from either North America or Europe. There's definitely sort of a bias there for Western countries in general. And this is the same also when you don't look at BIDS data set, but like the BIDS community. So people who actually work on BIDS in general and who are the contributors. Well, once again, you see that there's a clear bias with Europe and North America. And even then, when you look here at the different brain hacks that have happened all over the world, where did they happen? Once again, we see that there is a bias towards those things. Towards meanings toward Western countries in general. And keep in mind that usually those communities are those that are also the most definitely actually for a large majority of the people involved in them, they clearly want to make sure that we have a very diverse and inclusive community, and yet we sort of struggle to sort of reach further than our own network sometimes. But I think I'm gonna wrap up there, because otherwise I could obviously go on for a very, very long time on any other topic that relates to open science, but I sort of want to wrap up in terms of sort of a general sort of metaphor that people make when they talk about open science. I think it's kind of valid still nowadays, and it's just the metaphor of open science as a buffet, right? The idea is that when you want to do open science, don't try to stuff yourself on everything and select what works for your study, and do it this one piece at a time. So the idea is that you go to the buffet and you pick a little bit of something, and you're going to improve maybe how you write your code, or how you're going to you start using version control and Git to sort of make sure that you learn a little bit of this. Once you get a little bit familiar with this, maybe, I don't know, you could sort of try to figure out how to better organize your data. But the thing is, don't try to do everything all together all at once. Otherwise, this is like a perfect recipe for a burnout. I think that as things are moving along, we may even realize that even for an individual, it will be completely impossible to do all of those things, even if they go step by step. So we may have to sort of start doing some division of labor, and some people in some teams are going to be better at doing some things and some others better at doing others. But I don't think we should expect everyone to be doing everything, because I don't think that's going to be a good solution for the long run. And also because my talk was about best practices, and another reason why you should sort of be kind to yourself and is that things are always changing. Including best practices that keep getting better, which is kind of an interesting way to use superlatives, but yeah, anyway. And so it's good to sort of, try to be on top of things in your field, and especially when it comes to best practices, but don't, once again, be kind with yourself if you didn't know about the latest new thing that you should be doing, or that someone says somewhere that you should be doing. And with that, I would just like to thank people from my lab, the origami lab here. And also I would like to thank people from the BITS community. So that has more than, I think now 300 contributors altogether. And also a big thank you to my fellow BITS maintainers here and the BITS steering group, who are sort of, without whom, the whole BITS thing wouldn't be, keep on moving like it is nowadays. And I would also like to thank you all for your attention.